Welcome to Tabletop Tommies. I'm Jonny,
And I'm Phil.
and in today's episode, we're talking about the Warlord GT, also known as BritCon, hosted by the BHGS in Nottingham. It really is Warlord's flagship event. So, for anyone who's listened to us on an audio platform, we are streaming this on YouTube as well. And so, if you want to see the maps, see the tables, basically see the tournament, all the photos from the weekend, jump over onto the YouTube channel and you can see it in all its glory. I guess the big question, the first thing you notice when you get there, Phil, is the venue. What's the venue like for this?
So yeah, it's held at BritCon, which is obviously one of BHGS's main events of the year. It's at Nottingham Trent University. Really nice campus, bang in the centre of Nottingham. The gaming venue was brilliant. I haven't been before. I understand from previous years that I think people were underneath the glass roofs and they were getting quite hot and sweaty during the course of the weekend. We were nicely tucked away, massive floor space, loads of space around the tables. The venue was top quality, really, really good.
Yeah, I couldn't make it this year, but the previous years, it was the exact same venue, and I did fall foul of the sun coming in through the glass roof. It was less the heat and more just like sun in your eyes. And so when people are picking table sides, sometimes you're picking your table side based on what having the sun on your back rather than in your face, which is quite an interesting dynamic to play war games under.
Yeah. But yeah, no, in terms of, it's in Nottingham, it's central UK. So it's great in terms of people traveling, around the UK, but also coming from overseas. So yeah, really, really good. Thumbs up there for the venue.
Yeah, and as the flagship event, they got a ton of players this year, didn't they?
So there were 70 players over the weekend. I think they sold more tickets, but not everybody could make it for the actual weekend. But yeah, 70 players. Well, it's certainly the biggest in the UK this year. I think it might even be the biggest in the world. I think the
Mm.
Spanish nationals might be challenging for it, but as far as I'm aware, it is. Yeah, it's certainly the biggest in the UK this year, if not the world. So yeah, really, really good.
Yeah, I think it has been bigger historically as well, and so there really is potential for it to break
Mhm.
sort of 100, even further than that potentially.
Yeah. And
Um,
there's space for it. There was a ton of space available. So if it stays at Nottingham Trent, I think it's been there for two or 3 years now. So if it does grow and grow, the venue can absolutely take more people without any concerns about that.
yeah, I think I could be wrong here, but I think you're right. I think this is the third year, and the thing that I really liked about the venue was they throw in the accommodation as well because the students aren't there. You can buy your accommodation with your ticket and stay in the halls, which I think is a huge win because it just saves. It's one less thing you have to organize, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the people I went up with, half of us stayed in the accommodation, the other half stayed in the Premier Inn, which is literally across the road. So whichever way you look at it, you've got accommodation which is a similar price, bang on site. So yeah, no concerns there as well. So yeah, accommodation was good, venue was good, location in terms of central UK, all good so far.
Yeah. So I guess the format is the next question. My understanding was it 6 games, and what was the points limit?
Yeah, so 1100 points, single platoon, generic. So the pack was really straightforward. You don't need to say any more than that. Obviously, there's always, interpretations as to what counts as a generic unit and not, but that's down to the list checkers to make sure that all the lists are fine beforehand. So 1100 points generic, 6 games, so three on each day. It was 2 hour rounds. And I had a few practice games locally, and we were aware of the 2 hour rounds, and we were thinking, actually, is that pushing it a little bit? You'd expect to see maybe 2 hours to 15 or 2 hours 30. As it was, we basically had a 15-minute admin built into that, so the actual playing time was 2 hours, but the admin side of things, you had 15 minutes, and it was fine. I think maybe one of my 6 games didn't get to turn 6. All of them got to turn 6, other than that one. And I think one got to turn 7. So no issues there in terms of getting the games sorted. If it was 2 hours without the admin, that'd be pushing it, because by the time you got to the table, talked about terrain, talked through your lists, especially if it's a mission with pre-deployment out the bag and prep bombardment, that's going to cut in. But yeah, 2 hours of game time, of playing time, no issues at all there.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it's kind of like the rounds are 2 hours 15 by the sounds of things. Then that you rock up to the table, you've got 15 minutes to do your setup, etc., and then 2 hours after that 15 minutes. So it is kind of like they're giving you 2 hours 15 in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
How
yeah.
long were the intervals between the games?
I think they were anywhere between 20, 25 minutes and 45 maybe. So more than enough time to, clear down your stuff, go and get a drink, go and get some food, pop outside, whatever, and then get back in. I didn't see a huge amount of the show, which was, which disappointing because there were some good traders there. There was a bring and buy and so on. And I think in the past they've had the Friday night gaming and then the Saturday, Sunday. Um, if we had a bit more time, because obviously they're limited in terms of what time they need to finish in the evenings. If there had been more time, I could have got to the show. Um, as it was, we easily could have played on Friday night. Most people from the UK they're taking at least half a day, if not the whole day, off on the Friday to travel up. We got there from Hampshire and Surrey at I don't know 6 o'clock. We easily could have played a game Friday night, and if that had given us more time on the Saturday or maybe an early finish on the Sunday, I think that would have been welcome. So yeah, that was my one. Yeah, and that's not nothing to do with the tournament. It's just about not being able to actually see the show, and there was some good stuff going on around us. There was lots of lectures and talks. There was some the great and the good from the historical side of wargaming with giving lectures and talks throughout the weekend. Saw a few people walking around I recognised. It would have been nice to maybe have had a chance to pop into one of those or spoken to those individuals, but as it
Yeah.
was, for the 2 days, it was heads down and get on with the game. But you had enough breathing space to get some food, get a drink, go to the toilet, and so on in between rounds.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Friday night game, I've done that game both as a casual game and there was one year he included it as part of the tournament. And
Hmm.
when it was part of the tournament, I thought it was a bit of a problem to be honest, because if someone got stuck in traffic, it meant they didn't turn up basically for the first game. And it also
Mm.
meant that some people who were coming further afield, like Scotland, were having to take a day off work, whereas they would have just arrived at midnight instead. And so I really liked the Friday night as an option rather than a rather than something that you had to do. What is interesting is the fact it was 6 games because at a lot of the shows, like when we run one at a show,
Hmm.
we'll run it as 5 games. And then on
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
Sunday, you have a really long break in the middle, as you say, to give people time to see the show. And
Hmm.
so it's interesting that we've really squeezed the games in for this one. Do you think that was because of the number of players that to differentiate them, or do you think it was just because the focus is on the game and for the weekend?
I don't know. Gaz would have to. Gaz Betts, who's the head CEO, would have to answer that one. We did say when we did the Welsh Nationals review that having 5 games didn't split the pack. We had 52 players at the Welsh Nationals. When you start getting over 40 or so players, that 6 game really does differentiate.
Yeah,
The final
absolutely.
standings. If we'd only had the 5 games, given that day one wasn't Swiss, so day one was random pairings and day two was Swiss. If you only had 5 games and you had 3 games against, potentially top place players or people who are going to finish towards the bottom, that wouldn't be as good as actually the way it turned out, which was three games of random pairings. And then on day two, you started, by round 5, round 6, you were playing against players who were of a similar ability because it started to level out as you got through into those later rounds.
Yeah,
So
that was the next thing I was going to ask you about actually. The because I was aware that it was sort of what I'm going to call semi-Swiss, where day one is random, day two is traditional Swiss rankings.
yeah.
Um, and I wanted to know what your thought was on that because it's branded as a GT, which sort of in the tradition of, well, 40K, I think were probably the first sort of big brand to use the label GT, which
Mm.
sort of has always been a very competitive environment. We'd always associate competitive tournaments with full Swiss throughout. And so to have the semi-Swiss, I don't know if that did it feel just as competitive even without Swiss throughout, or do you think it should have sort of picked a side of the fence, as it were?
No, I think it felt absolutely competitive all the way through. There were players there from all around the world. Anyone who follows, competitive bolt action, if you look at the list of names, Marcus put an article up this week on the Warlord community site. If you look at the list of names and where people finished, you'll recognise some guys from WTC and World Open War, etc. So, and they weren't bringing fluffy lists; they were bringing full on hard competitive lists. So there absolutely was that as well. I didn't have any easy games. With respect to all of my opponents, they all pushed me. I lost 2 of my games over the 6. So in that sense, I didn't feel like it was, um, you know, like a jump to the left system, for example. It was nothing like that at all. Equally, if it had been full on Swiss 6 games, bring whatever you want, I may not have gone because I get that from the Welsh Nationals, for example, this year, or playing in WTC or World Open War. As we know from the pod, I like this more historical thematic side of things, but that doesn't mean you still can't play competitively within that framework. So in that sense, it didn't bother me. I wanted to go to the GT. I wanted to see what BritCon was about. I enjoyed it. For some people, maybe if when you see the word GT, maybe they think, oh, actually, what I want is the bring anything you want, ignore the theme, ignore the historical side of things. Would they have got 70 players? I don't know. I'm not sure if you would have had a field as big as we did, if it was a replica of a WoW pack or a replica of WTC or the Welsh Nationals. It was nice that there were so many different players from different countries and different experiences and backgrounds. You absolutely had some really thematic, cool lists, and then you had. I played Paul Wickens, for example, in round 3, and it was like the most horrific list you could build for the Brits. My list was pretty bad as well, to be fair. I'm not, and that was fine. Like I didn't mind playing that list. I didn't mind playing more fluffy thematic list. So because you can
Yeah,
still play competitively with a thematic fluffy list.
absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
a mindset, isn't it, rather than the creation of the list.
Well, it's also, I think, your pack restrictions. I think some packs, and obviously as we're moving to V3, this will all change completely. But I think some packs sort of breed very competitive lists. If it's just sort of like unlimited platoons, completely generic, do whatever you want other than that, that tells the players this is a competitive tournament. If it's the other side where it's theatre selectors only, single platoon, that tends to tell your players this is like, yes, you can play hard, but it's a thematic tournament.
Mm.
Last year at the Warlord GT, they'd also tied it in with the English Nationals, which really told people this is a very competitive tournament, sort of no holds barred. It'll be interesting to see if next year they do lean further into the theme, because I think you're right. I think that is, as sort of your premier event, I think it would be good. We've got the nationals in the UK. We've got the national events for the competitive scene. I think the GT could be, but then for me, it's just that name of the GT. I think could probably do with a rebrand to tell people this isn't a no holds barred tournament. Bring your thematic lists. Let's see what the system can do, kind of thing.
Or you go the other way and go, this is a full on GT in the sense of how people know it from 40k and other game systems. In which case, bring what you want. To be fair, the pack didn't have any restrictions. You could have
Yeah.
brought as many flamethrowers as you wanted, as many Gurkha powers as you wanted within the single platoon limit, as many multi launchers, and some people absolutely did. So you were if you were choosing to not do that, it was a choice from the player rather than it being the pack that said no, you can't do that at all. So.
Yeah. I mean, potentially in the long run, it would be good for them to have both catered to. Basically, you have your GT, your competitive scene tournament, and then you have sort of a Warlord Open where it's just
Mhm.
basically bring all the weird and wackies from the whole system and let's sort of have a fun weekend without worrying too much about who wins. And they have historically tried that, I think. I think it was 2019. They ran like a two-tiered tournament where you could either buy a competitive ticket or a thematic ticket, but then I think that created a bit of friction because if memory serves, I think the sort of the prize fund lent more into the competitive side. So the competitive side sort of awarded first, second, third. The thematic side didn't have placings. And so I think they had slightly fewer prizes because they just sort of had best themed, best painted. And I think that caused a few grumbles. And so I think they've tried the two-tiered tournament and it wasn't great. So yeah, I think it would be good to have two Warlord tournaments a year. And only issue I could see with that potentially is it might dampen your ticket sales because you really just want one premier event, don't you?
Yeah, and my feedback to Marcus and to Gaz was if this is a Warlord's flagship premier event and that's how it's been portrayed and so on, if that's what it is, I personally think that a full-on competitive, no holds barred event will not get the numbers as opposed to a more open, like you say, Warlord Open event where you'll get people who've been playing a few games. I played against at least one person this weekend who they've been playing since V1, but this was their first 2-day event. And that was fantastic. That's what you want. You want
Nice.
people who are happy to come to the Warlord GT in Nottingham, the home of Warlord, the home of miniatures, gaming in the UK, and feel like they can do that. And we'll talk about the list later, but this was a 12 dice list with a Sturm Tiger. It's not going to win any prizes for the most competitive list ever. That was brilliant. That game was amazing, and that was great to see. I think if the GT and to be fair, they have said as well that they're retiring the trophy. This is the final GT for V2. Next year it may look different. I personally would be in favour of a much more of an open event, and if there's 100+ people there, that's amazing. If Warlord also want to run an absolute, no hold bars, bring what you want event, fantastic. I'd have that as a separate event.
Yeah,
But
I think that's fair.
who am I to say? I am simply some bloke on the internet of a podcast. So there we go.
No, but it's all good feedback, isn't it, ultimately? Should we jump into having teased the list there?
Yep.
I'm curious what you took. So do you want to run us through your list?
Yeah, so as I've said before, I kind of think about what nations I want to take to what events during the course of the year. I knew I wanted to take the French at some point this year. I knew I wanted to take my Japanese. I didn't take the Japanese to the Welsh Nationals, which was my plan. So I was like, okay, where are the Japanese going to fit in? I did toy with the idea of bringing them to this. I also toyed the idea of bringing the French. I ended up going British in the end because and I made the choice based on this is the end of V2, and I want to run things that may not see the light of day down the line. So it's a British list. I didn't take the filthiest list I possibly could. It was still good. Don't get me wrong. So I had it was based on the Battle of Admin Box. I've written this list like about 18 months ago, and I've been waiting for an opportunity to take it. So the Admin Box was February 1944. It was arguably a bit of a turning point for the Brits in Burma because it was basically one of the first times they showed they could take the Japanese on and beat them. The context of it is the Admin Box was essentially a defensive position in southern Burma. It was a kind of rear guard action, but then the Gurkha 7th Rifles and a squadron of Lees appeared basically. So my essential army was effectively four regular Gurkha squads. I say it wasn't that nice in that sense. We had some engineers, we had the Lee, and then it was your 25 pounder, your mortar, and so on. But it wasn't Gurkha Powers. It wasn't a Dacre Stewart. It wasn't the LMG bikes. I had a Humber Mark II with the autocannon and so on. It was only 14 dice, I think 14 or 15 dice. So I knew I was going to get outdiced by certain lists. But it was a good list. I liked it. It was enjoyable. It was fun to play. I did have a couple of warm-up games locally where I did put the Dacre Stewart in. I did put some LMG bikes in. I actually took a couple of Chindit squads in the warm-up games with LMGs to get the fire and maneuver. And that listed really well, but I was like, I don't really want to do that. So I kind of lent into the theme, wrote it all up, researched it, and all that sort of thing. So yeah, four lots of Gurkhas, engineers in an Indian pattern carrier, Humber Mark II, a Lee, and then your normal trimmings of sniper, mortar, 25 pounder, forward observer, anti-tank rifle, and so on.
Nice. So kind of like 75% of the way to
Yeah.
cheese, basically.
Yeah, 75% of the way to cheese, but with a historical nod. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice. Jumping into game one then, what was
Yep.
the mission for game one?
So game one was key positions, and I was playing Will. Never played Will before, so that was a nice bonus there as well. I just will say on that note, I was really looking forward to playing different people over the weekend, and I played 4 new players who I haven't met before, so that was
Nice.
fantastic. Because there's always a danger if you go to enough events, and I've been to a lot in the last couple of years, you start to see the same faces and start to see the same people. And the 2 games that I played against people I played previously were great, but it was really good to play new people. So yeah, I played Will. He had a Soviet list, really nice list. It was higher dice count than me, which you'd expect from Soviets. He had engineers in body armor in a Comms Omelette. He had a mounted recon squad in a brain carrier, so that's 2 flamethrowers. He had a flamethrower team, so that's 3 flamethrowers. He had a storm group, so they get the benefit of ignoring defended position. They get to strike first in assaults. He had a Katusha. He had 2 squads of Strafbat, which I was quite pleased to see, given that I was running Gurkhas. I was like, yeah, that's a nice easy kill potentially in close combat. The free inexperienced squad, and then mortar and howitzer and so on. So we played key positions. We had four objectives. I kind of like three or five. Fours, I'd given a
Yeah.
choice. I'd rather have an odd number than an even number. I think I won the roll off. I was looking to place my objectives, or when I get the choice, 12.1 inches away from each other, basically. And I didn't want them stuck behind cover because I wanted the Gurkhas. I had up and atom as my national characteristic. I wanted the ability to bounce from one assault or one area of the board to another and start contesting or controlling objectives.
But you
So we
sort of
end.
put them down the middle rather than stacking one side or one quarter. It
Yeah,
was
so
all
I
nicely strung down the middle, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that was kind of how, I think the first one I placed was looking at the map. It's just to the right of the number 17, so it was basically in a gateway, um, but you could see it. There was enough openings to get to it, but if you needed to, you could probably hunker down. I placed that one. Will placed the one on the left of that, which is in the courtyard. So that was going to be a bit of a nightmare to get into because this courtyard had like three entrances to it. The next one I placed was the one in the center, so about 12.1 inches away from where I placed the first one, and then we'll put the last one in on the right hand side of the map, in the field area. So they were all pretty close, which I was happy with. I think Will won the dice for the table, or I can't remember which way around it went, but on the map I'm attacking from top to bottom. In terms of how the game went, I won that one. I think it was two objectives to me and two contested, but it might have been 1 and 3. Can't remember which way around it was at the end.
Interesting.
But I basically was able to. So on looking at the map, there's two small buildings and a small courtyard just top above the center line. That was kind of like I kind of pushed my Gurkhas up and kind of fanned around either side of that, to basically give me the ability to threaten those three objectives, which are center and to the right. I ignored the one on the left. I wasn't interested in going for that because it was tucked away. There was these walls. You can't see it from the picture, but the walls you can't see over them as infantry, so you can't fire onto that objective. You
I was
have to
going to
get.
ask about that as well. How did you rule that in terms of advancing? Did you allow the troops to sort of hoist each other over there, or was it you had to
No,
go through the gateway?
had to go through the gateway. So you can see from the map where his engineers and the comsom they've gone through the gateway into that space. His inexperienced squad, they were in a truck. They went through the gateway into the building and then pushed into the objective in the middle. So I kind of ignored that one on the far left as we look at it, focused on the three in the middle. I wouldn't say got lucky because Will chose to do this, but
Hmm.
Will put his storm group, a flamethrower team, and I think his lieutenant in a truck, and ran it down the road on turn one, before my Lee had come on. And I had my Lee on first wave. So my Lee rolled on later on in the term, and I could basically put 10 machine gun shots and the big gun into it, pop the vehicle. Didn't manage to kill any of the units inside, but it forced them all down before he'd able to activate them. I think he got the flamethrower team out before I managed to do that. He put the truck on, then he got the next dice, got the flamethrower team out, then I popped it, which was a huge help to me because it obviously kept the storm group and the LT down with a load of pins as well. He pushed up on his left, with the engineers and the comsom and then he pushed up the mounted recon and the brain carrier through the middle. I was able to basically set my Gurkhas up in and around the center, kind of sticking out. They were behind terrain, but with one person sticking out. So I had the whole 12-inch, had the visibility to do the whole 12-inch assaults. The way the game went, my Gurkhas in the middle, pushed up. We dropped the forward artillery observer into the middle. Bit of a danger close moment, but managed to get away with it in terms of not taking any major casualties. I took out, I think, both of the Strafbat squads and the inexperienced squad, so I was fairly kind of comfortable in those two central objectives. I ignored the one on the left as we look at it for the moment. Had a Gurkha squad pushing towards the one on the right. By the end of the game, he'd managed to throw, I think, like 2 or 3 men across 2 units into that center right objective. So that was contested. The one that is just to the right of the number 17, that was mine. And then the bit that threw it at the end, and it was bad luck for Will / it was lucky dice rolling for me. So I had a Gurkha squad in the Humber, which had pushed up, with the intention that they could either swing into the middle or, if needs be, they'll threaten that far left objective. Um, couldn't get close enough to contest it because his engineers had pushed beyond the objective. So I couldn't get within the whole 3 inches and so on. So the only way I was going to clear them off that was a double hit. So the Humber went in, I think I fired the autocannons, took out maybe one or two, and he took them from the front men rather than the
Hmm.
back, which then allowed me to then basically assault into them with the Gurkhas. Killing on sixes because there's engineers in body armor, which I managed to do. I won that assault, cleared off the engineers. It was still contested because there was an officer. There was a, I think, yeah, he had a lieutenant and a captain. So one of his officers was still in that vicinity. But my Gurkhas were able to contest. So that was a good win. But it was close. It could have been a draw.
Yeah, was the dice
His
count quite close as well?
I 8, 8, 6, eight,
Yeah,
five
so
to in
not
yeah,
much in it.
not much in it. His storm group on the far right, I think they failed an order test in the final turn. So had they passed that order test, they would have pushed up and either shot the Gurkhas who are sitting on that right objective, or gone into close assault. And obviously with their special ability, it wouldn't have been a foregone conclusion that the Gurkhas were going to win. But yeah, I won that one. I said before on the pod, I really like objective missions. And I was really happy with the start and how that went.
Yeah, good game. Moving into game two, then was it another good mission game two, or was it a
Game
bit of a
two,
rogue one?
it was point defense, and
Bit
I'm
rogue.
not I'm not a fan of point defense generally. Uh, and in a tournament setting, if this was a full-on Swiss tournament and we were playing point defense in round two, I don't think it's the best mission you can play. To be fair, I
No,
was
I think even in casual games, I'm not a big fan of it. It's one of the attacker defender ones where it really is asymmetrical and it's it can really lead to sort of foredrawn conclusions. And so I think if you are going to put it in, you have to mix it up in some way just to give an edge and balance it out a little bit.
Yeah, which Gaz had done. So he changed it from the rulebook mission. So what he said was once the defender had put the three objectives down and deployed their units, the attacker in secret nominates one of the three objectives. If they hold that single objective at the end of the game, then they've won. So you still had the whole you need to hold two, or if you manage to get the one that you've pre-selected. So that does change things. And I'd practiced this game in the week beforehand. Um, and that was a really close game. I only just won on turn 7 as a defender in the practice game. So it is absolutely possible to win as the attacker if you have the whole. You only need to get one objective. So I was playing Ed, who is a member of the Warlord staff. He's in the Warlord resin team. I played Ed before, Three Good Men this year. He had a sort of British Eighth Army list, and that was the same list again. Ed won the dice roll and elected to attack.
Interesting.
Yes, and I was very happy with that.
Yeah,
um,
obviously.
yeah. So Ed had, I think he had four infantry squads. So he had two chunky 10-man regular squads, LMG, SMG on the officer, two SAS squads, 5-man in brain carriers, and then he had a medium howitzer, mortar, sniper, the Humber Mark II, a Crusader, and so on. So yeah, I defended. There's not a huge amount of variety in terms of where you can put those objectives because of the restriction. So I tried to kind of push away from the edge. I wanted to put them in the center as possible.
Because
Ed
outflanks in play in this, yeah.
outflanks in play, and Ed chose not to outflank. So I was doubly happy at this point. So I'm defending, and he's not outflanking. Um, the way I set my guys up, I had one Gurkha squad on one side, by on the left flank with one objective, another Gurkha squad on the other side with another objective. I had the Lee and the 25-pounder in the middle. I had two Gurkha squads in reserve. I think the Humber was in reserve, and the engineers and the Indian carrier were in reserve. So depending on where he was going, I could bring on two more Gurkha squads, the engineers and the Humber. I rode my luck a little bit with the Lee in prep bombardment. I was like, yeah, do you know what? We'll go for it because yes, it can go, and that is like obviously a lot of points to go. But I felt like actually I'd rather have it on from turn 1 and start dishing out some shots. As it was, I got pinned. The Lee didn't do anything on turn 1; he just rallied, and then I think he dropped. Then he basically, the Lee did nothing. The Lee basically got pins on turn 1. He brought the Crusader on. He managed to kill it. He managed to hit it on a long range hit. He needed a 6 to penetrate well, not to penetrate, but in order to do superficial damage. He got that. Then he needed to roll a 6 to set it on fire. He got that, and then I failed the morale check. So the lead did nothing.
Yeah,
But
not much you can do about that, to be
not
honest.
much you could do. But, it was. You need to roll a lot of 6s in a row, and I was thinking, well, I'll get it on the board and I'll sort it out. If you get some pins. My officer was hanging around at that point in order to try and shed the pins, but it didn't work out.
Well, I thought you were going to say you'd lost it in prep, and then I was going to say that putting it on in prep is actually fine because the chances of losing it to a prep are so low.
Yeah,
Armor
yeah, yeah,
8 plus, you're generally all right during prep. It's a very slim chance, but you
yeah.
managed to lose it in a equally unlikely way.
Managed to lose it in a bit of a face-off with the Crusader,
Yeah.
and I think my 25-pounder went fairly early doors as well.
Was that a
That
mortar hit?
I think it was from his medium howitzer,
Mm.
which I then managed to take out with my medium mortar. Now it didn't matter because he had his SAS in brain carriers in reserve, and they failed to come on until turn maybe 4 and 5.
That's
So,
really interesting. So he didn't outflank,
and he didn't bring them on in first
but
wave. Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
he reserved them.
Yeah, yeah. So I basically spent 3 turns kind of sat there waiting for him to show his hand. And then once I realized which objective he was going on to, I had 2 Gurkha squads to come on. I brought the engineers on the other side because I'd managed to pop. Well, no, he dismounted, sorry, his SAS from the brain carriers. So he put them on 9 on an advance, then ran them 12. Because by the time they came on, his only real choice was just to run everything towards that one objective.
Mhm.
So I used my engineers on the other flank from the objective that he'd chosen to put some pressure on and flame the rifle squad that had pushed up. So that was a 6-turn game. That was a win from me. Didn't get a huge amount of dice. I think I maybe got 3 dice the whole game because I didn't have a lot to do.
Yeah.
Basically was kind of sat there waiting. I spent a lot of time going down because I didn't want to lose any dice, and I was comfortable that I wasn't going to end up with him clearing the objective. He could have contested, but you have to obviously hold the objective to win that mission. So
Yeah.
yeah, no problems there. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like he got a bit unlucky with the reserve role there. And then sort of combined with the fact that he didn't have a second route onto it, it's
Yes.
really just sort of held him back.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I think if he'd brought them on first wave, or if he hadn't failed, on the reserve roles, it would have been a different story.
Do you
Yeah.
think if he'd outflanked, it would have caught you off guard? Or do you think you could have handled that?
Uh, it absolutely would have made me hold back in check because I'd have to have obviously, been mindful of it either side, and then it's at what point does he outflank, and then I've got to then bring on my reserves. Are they going to fail their roles and so on? So in the practice game, I played in the week before, it wasn't clear from Ben, my opponent, which side he was going to come on until he did. So I absolutely had to hold my guys back in reserve. He then brought 4 or 5 units on that one flank very quickly, and then it became a slugfest. So it had the potential to do that. I think Ed could have been more aggressive. I think with the Humber and the Crusader, once the Lee had gone, the Humber was there. Obviously, the
Mm.
Humber's not going to hurt the it's not going to hurt the Crusader because they only have an auto cannon. So he could have been more aggressive and pushed them up, but he held back a little bit, I thought.
So maybe he saw his unlikely tank kill against the Lee,
Yeah, yeah,
and he thought it could swing back the other way. So let's be
it could.
careful here.
Yeah,
Brilliant. So was that 2 wins so far then?
yeah. So 2 wins. Yeah. So obviously happy with how that went going into the final
I'll tell you
non-Swiss
what,
game.
before we do jump into game 3, one thing I've noticed, and I could be wrong here, is I don't see any secondary objectives. So were there no secondaries in this?
So there's no secondary. So we were recording our win, draw, loss, and we were recording the dice taken.
Yeah. I guess what will be interesting is when we come to kill points, I'll ask you then if you felt like you could have done with a secondary. But let's jump forward to game 3, I guess. What was
Yeah.
game 3?
So game 3 was sectors. This was against Paul Wickens, and we both said at the start of the game we didn't want to play each other with respect to each other in a non-Swiss situation. Like if we were going to have to play each other, let's play each other on day 2 when when it's sort of the sharp end in Swiss.
Yeah.
We had very very similar lists. So Paul had 4 Gurkha para squads and then engineers and transport. I had 4 normal Gurkhas and engineers in the transport. He had a Dakar Stewart. I had the Lee. He had the LRDG Jeep. I had the Humber. We both had 25 pounds. We both had mortars. He had, I think, 18 dice. So we had three or four. I think 50. Yeah, three more dice than me, because he had a flamethrower team in the Jeep. He had a Piat in the Jeep and so on. So he found ways of getting his dice count up. So yeah, playing Paul. Obviously, a very, very, very good player, international player. We've played each other 4 times now. So the first 3 games were all draws. So let's see who comes out on top in this one. We're playing sectors. He's got the dice advantage. We both roll for prep. I don't get prep and he does. So
Oh, I hate that.
yeah,
This
yeah.
is why I really like when they house rule that it's one dice for
Yeah.
both, so either no one or everyone.
So I did
Yeah.
ask Paul at the start, should we just roll one dice to see what happens? And Paul's like, no, Phil, it's in the pack. We both roll. I was like, okay. So I obviously took some pins. I don't think I lost anything in the prep, but I did obviously take some pins.
Yeah.
Um, and then it basically just turned into a massive Gurkha punch up in the middle. I think at one point Gaz came over to watch because we had a great game. We were just laughing all the way through. It
Yeah.
was the most ridiculously funny game. Paul referred to it as two heavyweights just smacking each other in the middle of the ring, and that's what it turned into. Paul won it comfortably because I basically ran out of stuff to stop him. I think it became clear on about turn 4 that I wasn't going to win this because he could just walk into my zone. So I just went hunting dice. I purely focused on the kill points the rest of the game. Um, yeah, he started with maybe 30 Gurkhas, I think. He had 2 left at the end of the game. I started with 8, 16, 28 Gurkhas. I had 3 left.
Yeah.
So the Gurkhas just smacked each other around. The engineers kind of rocked on and flamed a few things. And if you're watching this on YouTube, basically you'll see the map is a massive explosion in the middle of the board saying Gurkha punch up. And that's effectively what happened. We just ran at each other. And then whoever was standing at the end of that turn had another go the next turn. Um, yeah, not much to
Brilliant.
say. Great game.
It sounds like you
Solid.
decided to play kill points instead of the mission.
I meant to play the mission. I planned to play the mission. I got prep bombardment, and then he dropped his artillery observer at the start of turn 2. So I was like, okay, I've got 2 turns here where I've got a lot of pins. So I was shifting the pins by using up an atom. But I'm upping atom them towards Gurkha Paras. So
Yeah.
it's not as though I'm like going, oh, I can go and pick off something easy. There was one point actually, I think it was on turn 3 or maybe even turn 2. Paul brought his engineers on the truck on the right hand side of the map if you're watching this on YouTube. And I had a Gurkha squad behind the farmhouse on the right hand side. I didn't think I was in 12 inches. So I was like, I'm not going to declare the charge because obviously if I was in 12 inches, I could declare the charge, dismount the engineers, beat them up in close combat. The other thing I was mindful of at that point, the Stuart hadn't come on. So let's say I was in 12 inches and I'd won the combat, I'm then exposing those Gurkhas to attack a Stuart. So I didn't do that. I basically ran across, advanced across in front of the truck, but away from 12 inches because I didn't want to get him to pop the engineers out and flame it and then hit it with rifles. We did measure afterwards after we'd resolved that dice just to see if it was within 12, and it was just in.
Mm.
And that Paul said that was potentially a turning point. I don't think it was. I think, to be fair, the dice were against me and so on. But yeah, that was maybe one point where it might have gone differently. But brilliant game. It was so much fun. Games against Paul always are. Yeah, we just punch each other in the middle. You'll see from the map, I did a little sneaky lieutenant forward observer and mule flank attack. Paul Stewart didn't come on until right to the very last turn. So I kind of ran up behind that hill. I was like, I'm not going to go over the crest of the hill because if I do, he's going to roll on with 18 dice and split fire and all that kind of thing. So bit of tongue in cheek there. My little flank attack with my solo lieutenant, my solo forward observer, and my mule.
So did they make it into the neutral zone by the end of the game?
They're in the neutral zone. I didn't bother
Nice.
putting them into his. I literally abandoned the mission on turn 4. It's like there's
Yeah.
no point me trying to get anything into that zone, and I just went hunting for dice because I knew that come the end of day 2, potentially dice count was going to matter, and that's why he ended up with 2 Gurkhas and I ended up with 3 Gurkhas because we were just trading dice
Yeah.
and taking models of each other.
Because it was dice killed, wasn't it? Rather than a
Dice
dice
difference, yeah,
difference. Yeah.
dice killed. So I wasn't fussed about how many dice I was losing. I
Yeah.
was just going for it, which is not like me. Normally, I obviously play quite conservatively and get the win, but don't go all in. Whereas in this mission, and at times during the weekend, I was like, nah, throw caution to the wind and go and get some dice.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but this was on the same table as game two. Is that right?
Yeah, I played on the same table, which I could have swapped. And I said to Paul at the start of the game, I played on this game last round. Do you mind? And Paul was like, I don't mind. I didn't have a problem with it. We could have swapped with people either side, and that was going on. So the BCP was doing the pairings, and obviously people weren't playing the same opponents, but it didn't necessarily do the same tables. We had to manually do it. It wasn't a problem. I didn't have an issue with it. Paul didn't. We just carried on for the sake of let's just play the game and get on with it. So
Nice. How were the tables generally?
they were good. Yeah, all six of my tables were good. I didn't. I took photos of all the tables, and we'll maybe drop some of these into the show as well. There certainly weren't any tables I looked at and went, okay, that's a horrible table. There might have been some missions where, like, if some of them, if you were playing surrounded,
Yeah.
there was an airfield table, for example, where it's obviously quite empty in the middle of the board. I wouldn't want to have played surrounded on that. But in terms of just the tables themselves, they look good, and obviously because Gaz and Colin both play a lot and are very experienced TOs as well as players, they were playable. It wasn't as though we were going to an event where the tables look great but they're not playable, and equally we weren't going to an event where they don't look good but they weren't playable. It ticks both the boxes.
Nice. Well, shall we move on to game four?
Yeah, so day two, so game four. So we're now Swiss. So I've gone into day two with 2 wins and a loss. I played Graham from Scotland. Haven't played Graham before, and we were playing Surrounded, which again is not one of my favourite missions, if I'm honest. So
No, and
uh,
when you were talking about the tables there, I was thinking the problem is more the mission than the table from what you're describing, because I don't know anyone who really thinks Surrounded's a good tournament mission. I think there's people who enjoy it as a mission, but
mhm.
not many players would say it's a great tournament mission, especially when you're in a row of tables, because you can't, like, it's very hard to
Yeah,
get
you
around the
can't.
table to use that confused fight rule.
Yeah, and that wasn't really an issue because I think every 3 tables there was a gap,
Oh,
maybe
nice.
4 at the most. So you weren't walking along like 8 tables to get round. I don't like Surrounded just because I'm not a massive fan of kill point missions, and I've said this numerous times on the pod. I like objective missions because there's a tactical element to it. I like the movement missions. I need to be somewhere by turn 6 in order to achieve something. Kill points, I'm just not a big fan of them. Graham was great. We had a really good game. Haven't played Graham before. I won, so made him defend. He had a really nice German list. I think it was like 14 dice, veteran heavy. So he had two big veteran squads with LMGs and rifles, 2 veteran squads with SMGs, and a pioneer squad. He had the Dakar Panzer 3. He had a 222. He had I think it was a dual light autocannon rather than single light autocannon, and a mortar and so on, sniper, that kind of stuff. So they're quite different. Veterans obviously, and they were big squads. They were, I think his SMGs were maybe six guys in each squad, maybe 7. The pioneers they weren't 5. They were 6 or so, and then maybe 8 or so in the LMG squad. So they were going to take some shifting, basically. So Graham won that. It was 8-6 on dice. So
So close.
and you need two points, I think, to win surrounded. I guess it wasn't the turning point because it happened in like turn 6.
Hmm.
But on the right hand side, I'd brought the Humber on. Between the Humber and the AT rifle, I'd taken out his 222, and I'd managed to swing around from my right towards the center. And it was turn 6, and his 222 was sat in hard cover. So whenever it was shooting, it was shooting at a -2 because it was basically giving me hard cover. I basically just brought pretty much as I could on from my table edge. I never really went around to his side of the table, so I was playing very, very tight with the Gurkhas and the Lee and so on. The turning point, if you can call it that, was he took a shot he declared a shot with the autocannon against the Humber. Now I could have escape moved around the corner in order to preserve the dice. I decided not to because he was going to hit me on 5s with the hard cover. Then he needs to roll 5s to glance and 6 to penetrate with the autocannon. I thought, you know what, I'm probably going to be okay. And I didn't wreck it. I didn't use my escape move because he had, I think, 1 officer solo man at that point. If I'd got that dice at that point in the game, it'd have been a victory for me.
Yeah.
So I decided, and normally, more often than not, I probably would have escape moved and gone for the draw. I decided not to. I decided to stay up, go for the win. Obviously hit me, and he penetrated, and he managed to blow up the Humber. So that then I think put us equal on dice, or maybe one to advantage. I can't remember the exact details. Then he nicked another dice, so he did win. I could have drawn, but I kind of decided on Saturday or Sunday morning that, oh, let's go for it. You know, we've gone Swiss now. Let's go for the win. If I don't win, hope to get a draw. As it was, I lost. But it was a great game. Like, and at the end of it, we were both, knackered from it. It was a good way to start a Sunday, but also quite an intense way to start a Sunday as well.
So
Yeah.
did he deploy his whole force?
No. He
Oh.
basically, so he is 50% in the middle. So
Mhm.
that's not everything. I didn't put all of the
Yeah.
units in. And basically, I came on from my table edge, both first wave and as much as I could in reserve. If I didn't come on from my table edge, I came on from either flank, but very close to my table edge. So I was playing it really, really
And then where
tight,
did he come on from?
basically next to me or behind me.
All
So
right, so he was
it was
playing the sneak behind you game.
it was the sneak behind me game. Yeah. I was really conscious of not losing the lead early doors, and so I didn't want to be too aggressive with the lead. We ended up with the Lee and the Panzer III 4 inches away from each other, shooting each other, but not penetrating. So yeah, I think there were 2 turns where they were both shooting each other, but neither of them managed to blow the other one up. So that was a great game against Graham. Really, really nice opponent. If you look at his list, you didn't look at it and go, "This is an amazing list." It was just a really solid, tight, strong, well-built German
Your all
list.
comers list, yeah.
Yeah. So going into game 5, this is now 2 wins and 2 losses. And game 5 was Kitty Hawk Down, which I really like as a mission.
Oh, really? I was expecting you to be on the fence with this one. Like with Surrounded, how I was saying it's a fun mission, but generally not a great tournament mission. Did you find that this
I
was in fact a good tournament mission?
I think it is a good tournament mission because you know what's going to happen. You know that on turn 4, something's going to happen. It's going to come along the center line. Okay, you don't know where along the center line it's going to come, and you know that if you're within 12 inches of the center line or 6 inches either side, something bad's going to happen in terms of pins or a light howitzer or a medium or heavy howitzer hit. So in that sense, it's balanced. It's not going to happen to one of you. If you choose to run onto the 24-inch line at the end of turn 3 and go and sit there and wait for it to come down, will more fool you because there's a chance that the Kitty Hawk's going to land on top of you. If you choose to stay, somewhere around the 12 inches from your table edge at the end of turn 3, with the ability to go one way or the other depending on where the crash site is, then that's how you play the mission. So I really
Yeah.
like it. And there's
My
that
only
element of
hesitation with it is I think it really does benefit fast armies. So people who are sort of like recce platoons, because they can respond quickly in your left-right direction,
yeah.
then they're less likely to get caught off guard by it landing on the wrong flank compared to your slower forces who sort of like plod forward.
Yeah.
And so that's where I could see potentially there being some asymmetry.
Yes, true. And I guess my response to that would be when you build a tournament list, you probably do need to think about, well, have I got at least one unit in a transport that can act as a reaction force, effectively? Thinking about the way the mission works, you randomly choose a side and then you roll 10d6 and you measure the number of inches from that side as to where the crash site is. Statistically, it's going to fall somewhere between 30 and 40 inches from one of the table sides. So it's basically going to go somewhere in the middle, off center.
Yeah.
So if you stack one side of the board and in the first 3 turns and it comes on the other, well, you've chosen to put your units on that side of the board and you've made a calculated risk and so on. I wouldn't outflank in this mission unless you've got a nice road running along the 24 inches line or an airstrip, because it's too much of a risk.
Yeah. Saying you should build your list accordingly. Were these missions pre-released before people submitted their lists?
No, they won't. But just generally speaking, I think if you go, well, I'm not telling people what to do here, but I think if you go into an event with foot sloggers and slow vehicles, and there's a danger or a chance that you might play double envelopment, or you might play sectors, or you might play something like Kitty Hawk Down, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot at the list building stage.
Well, I think that's unfair with the other two because double envelopment and sectors you can't just play as kill points, and so even when you are really slow, you don't have to play the movement game. Like I've seen people successfully play double envelopment as single envelopment, basically where they just stand on their back line and kill anything that comes towards them, and so you can play like that. Whereas Kitty Hawk, you definitely do need that fast response unit, and so I think I do like basically. I think what I'm hitting at is I like tournaments when if you're going to do quirky missions, just put them in the pack nice and early for people, is my thought on it.
My only response, my final response to that though, is that we know how Kitty Hawk Down works. You sit on the 12-inch line from your table edge with the ability to then advance to where the crash site is.
Yeah, but that's
And
not
you've
my
got
point.
turn
My
and you've
point is
got
that it's very rarely included, and so it's very peculiar for it to be in there. Like you wouldn't go to a GT expecting to play Kitty Hawk Down, is my point, and so
hmm.
that's why I would, if I turned up and it was in there, I would have liked to have known beforehand.
Yeah, true. But knowing it was in there, you plan for it when you deploy and play your first 3 turns of Kitty Hawk Down.
Absolutely.
We knew what the missions were in advance after the list had gone in. So we all had the opportunity to play the missions and think about how we were going to play those missions come the weekend itself. So yeah, as it was, playing Ben. Again, not met Ben before. Ben had been playing since V1, but this was his first sort of 2-day event. He had a really thematic list. It was sort of the last levy list based on Jojo Rabbit. So you had a Stern Tiger, couple of LMG squads with various different sort of armaments along the LMG, a big squad with AR, his German Shepherds, which were the Volks Grenadiers. Is that the right one? The kind of last levy,
Yeah,
inexperienced green. They
all
can go
assault
up to.
rifles.
They're the ones that can maybe go fanatic. I think they're the funny last levy list. Anyway, he had them, but they had the Sturm Tiger. So once he basically put the Sturm Tiger on my left hand side, obviously my Lee is going completely on the other side of the board because I don't want anything to do with that. I effectively had two Gurkha squads either side of the woods that are on the near my table edge, in order to be able to go around the woods and then, depending on where the crash site was, cross over the railroad. And there were 2 roads crossing the rail track, and I could also cross in the middle where there were flatbed trucks.
Oh,
So I
so
could
you'd
get
ruled the
you can
main
advance.
carriages,
So the
the
main
main
carriages
train
were
is impassable,
impassable. Yeah.
but the flatbed you can climb over.
Flatbed you can climb over, yeah.
Nice.
So I had the ability to go over side. And I played, once he put the Stone Tiger on my left, his right, all of his squads had Panzerfaust, so I knew that he did have an AT threat. But I played really aggressively with the Lee, and I basically just shoved it the other side. I shoved it onto his table side on turn 3, but far enough beyond the center point so that if the Kitty Hawk did come down, I was probably going to be okay. And I just put a load of pins out, load of machine gun shots out. I did well with my prep bomb, my forward observer, because I was able to again to put a lot of pins down, and I just basically focused on sticking a load of pins and taking away his infantrymen, because obviously if they've got a load of pins on them on turn 4, turn 5, they're not going to get towards the crash site, and I've got potentially 4 Gurkha squads who are going to advance into that area. One mistake I did make, I think it was on turn 4, I'd advanced a Gurkha squad up onto the flatbed. Then I advanced my forward observer, who'd already by that point fired his artillery shot behind them. The Sturm Tiger hadn't been at that point. He then fired the Sturm Tiger, hit the Gurkhas, and obviously because it's a 4-inch template, clipped the forward observer, and both squads went. So it
Wow.
didn't matter because I still had 2 Gurkhas and my lieutenant in order to be able to get onto the crash site. But that was a bit of a rookie error on my behalf. I had my engineers in reserve in the Humber. By this point, most of his squads were either dead or had pins on them, so I was confident he wasn't getting towards a crash site. So I decided to try and make his Sturm Tiger run away, and the only way I could do that was by hitting it with the flamethrower. I also couldn't penetrate it because it's a armor 11, so even with the top armor, it's armor 10. But what I could try and do was put some pins on it, assuming that it accepted the pins. So there's a chance it could shrug them off.
Yeah.
And then see if it would fail the morale check. It didn't. So I
Oh,
lost the engineers. Ended up losing the Indian carrier because he ran his LMG squad towards it. But it didn't matter at that point.
did
It
it
was
take
quite
the
fun.
pins at least?
I think he did take the pins, but he still managed to pass the test. Yeah. So it was a bit of a Hail Mary, and
yeah.
I was happy to do that. Turn 5. Let's but lovely guy and great game, really good fun, and a really cool list. It was nicely painted, nicely thematic. He'd written up the justification behind the units as well, so that was
Nice.
really good to see. Yeah,
Did he have many Panzerfaust?
everything had Panzerfaust. I think there was at least 1 or maybe 2 in every squad.
Because that's
So
a
I was,
surprise with that Lee getting right in their face if they've all got
there was
Faust.
so many pins.
Yeah.
It was just pins everywhere. Everyone could have a pin, basically.
Yeah.
Because I took out the Howling Cow and the mortar with my 25-pounder and my mortar fairly early doors. So I was playing really aggressively with the Lee. But I was just, yeah, I'm fairly confident if I stick enough pins on, it's going to be all right. And if it doesn't, well, he spent a turn shooting the Lee rather than actually rallying and getting towards the crash site.
Yeah.
So
Well,
either
that's the
way,
thing, isn't it? It's a nice distraction. Like you're baiting him sideways when he needs to go forward. So
yeah, yeah.
nice. Cool. So what are we on now? Is that 3 wins, 2 losses?
Yeah, 3 wins, 2 losses. Yep, yeah.
Cool.
So final game was against Colin and Japanese. Hadn't played Colin before. Nice Japanese list. It was a couple of SNLF squads with an LMG in each squad. He had an engineer squad, a militia squad, Type 92 tankette, which I absolutely love. I use that a lot when I play Japanese. Had the Type 89 Wygo, which has got the light howitzer armor 8, but it's slow, medium howitzer, and so on. So nice little squad. We're playing nuts, although not the nuts from the Bolt Action Alliance. It was
New nuts.
basically, yeah, new nuts. I think it's pretty similar, if not the same as Penetrating Strike, which we'd played in the WTC.
Hmm.
So you need to get into your opponent's deployment zone. You get points for that, and you get kill points. I basically played kill points. I had absolutely no intention of going across the board because it was a Stalingrad board. There was lots and lots of ruins and rubble in order to block line of sight, but there was also lots of open ground in between. And I was more concerned about him using Banzai to get across the board quickly. And if he really focused in on one side or the other, I wasn't going to be able to stop him. He had a higher dice count than me, and so on. So I basically had two Gurkha squads in the middle, one on one flank, one on the other flank. I had the Lee and the 25-pounder where his howitzer and his Wygo weren't. My Humber went on the side where his howitzer and Wygo were. I did kind of run my luck a little bit. He had his howitzer on ambush. I put a run order on the Humber to basically bait the ambush, but also to try and get in behind the ruins on the side. I got away with it because if I'd been hit, that Humber would have taken a lot of pins, potentially would have gone boom. And it ended up being a slugfest in the middle. He took out one Gurkha, so he had a heavy mortar, which is not on the map. It's as you look at the picture, it's on the right hand side, but it's clipped on the image. He fired at the Gurkhas on my right of center, on a 6, obviously. I went, I'm not going to go down. He rolled the 6, took out 7 of the 8, and then obviously they failed the morale check. So the Gurkhas there were basically protecting the Lee because his AT guys were hanging around outside of 12 inches, but close enough within 2 turns to get to the Lee. So I didn't go down because I wanted them to stay up and protect the Lee. So they went. I ended up with one Gurkha squad, my engineers, an AT rifle, and an officer and a sniper, just putting everything into those ruins in the middle because he pushed forward with his I think an engineer squad had gone up, he had a scout squad as well, so scouts had gone up, his LT had gone up, his flamethrower, so we ended up just basically just stuck in the middle, close assaults or him firing at point blank range. It was a draw in the end. I think it was 7-6 on the dice to me. So yeah, and I've by the end of it, I think he had maybe 2 engineers left in that central ruin area. All I needed to do was to kill one. They had a ton of pins on them. Likelihood is that they would have failed the morale check. That would have given me the dice, which would have given me the win. So very, very, very close draw. But great game. I haven't played him before. We went all the way through to 6 turns. Played in a really nice spirit. And for the final game at turn 6 or game 6 on 2 days, playing something like effectively double envelopment or penetrating strike, but playing it as a kill points mission was not mentally taxing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's why we usually have meeting engagement last, isn't it?
Yes.
On the terrain front, how did you
Mhm.
play your craters? And did you play that building in the middle just as a ruin rather than a 6-story building?
Yeah, so everything was a ruin. There were no buildings on this board.
Yeah,
So
that's a good.
it's
I've played that as a building before. The is it Pavlov's?
Pavlov's house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it becomes carnage because of the way the V2 building rules work, where you can only go down. I think you can go down 2 floors at a
You can
time.
run down 2 floors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it becomes real. If someone puts their sniper on the top floor and decides they want to get out, it takes like 3 or 4
Yeah.
turns.
Yeah, so we played that as a rune. Craters we played as rough ground, hard cover if you're in them,
Classic.
but we played them as soft cover if you're firing over them. So the reason was that effectively the craters are going to be semi-embedded.
Yeah,
And if you don't play them as no cover at all, firing through them, there's hardly any cover in the middle of that board. So we looked at
absolutely.
it and went, we kind of need some cover. Otherwise, we're just going to stand at either side of the board and take pot shots at each other. Obviously, vehicles weren't getting cover because unless they were inside the crater, because they're 50% rule, that kind of thing. But we did feel like we needed to have some kind of cover going across it. Did spend a bit of time talking about it. We agreed on that. The militia and the engineers on his right hand side. The reason why they are stuck there is they got hit with the bombardment from the air observer, and the Lee just kept putting out shots. And I was very happy that he didn't move his engineers or his militia up, because by the time he'd taken out that Gurkha squad with a heavy mortar, I had a Lee over there. My 25-pounder had gone by that point. I had 7 Gurkhas, a medium mortar, and an air observer. There was no way I was stopping 14 militia and 8 engineers just banzaiing up that side of the board. So yeah, I was quite happy that he didn't really get beyond the halfway line. Otherwise, I was going to get in trouble because I was running out of men towards the end of the game.
Yeah, interesting. And I presume there was no outflank in this one, much like double development.
I think you can, because it's effectively the penetration strike mission where you can outflank, but we just went full
Interesting.
send. Yeah, we went full send. I think I
Yeah.
kept back my engineers in the Indian carrier. I think he put everything on first wave. It was just like, do you know what? We'll just go for it, and we'll see what falls
Yeah.
out
I'm
into it.
surprised no one outflanked if it was in play. I wonder if part of it was with it being game 6, everyone just wants a nice, simple
Yeah, and
game.
it didn't really matter in the sense of the standings. It was like
Mhm.
not going to be top 10 kind of thing, top 15. So well, let's have a fun game at the end. So
Nice.
yeah.
So I guess spoilers there. Where did you place in the end?
So 26 overall. So I had three wins, 1 draw, 2
Hmm.
losses. Um, I think if the game 4 against Graham, if that had been a draw, for example, um, maybe I might have been a bit more aggressive in game 6 and really, really gone for the win. As it was, I was a bit like, well, I'm having a nice time. I'm having nice games. I didn't go there to finish top 10, top 15, and so on. I wasn't taking a WTC or a World Open War list. I went to experience BritCon, ideally to play new players, which is what I did, and to enjoy myself. So, yeah, more than happy with how it went. 3 wins and a draw and 2 losses. More than happy with that overall.
Yeah, the other thing that I thought was interesting is I noticed, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think draws were scored as half a win. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah, I don't actually
Mm,
know. I think if you look at BCP, you can probably work it out. I don't actually know, if I'm honest. I just looked at where I was and was like, okay,
mhm.
who am I playing next? So
Yeah.
I didn't pay a huge
Oh,
amount of attention during the weekend to
well,
the
they were. I was
ranking.
just curious what your thoughts were basically on
Oh,
that.
they were okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
That,
But because it's not a full-on competitive Swiss
mm,
tournament, if we were playing a full-on competitive Swiss, which was announced in advance, where you didn't play point defense, you didn't play Kitty Hawk Down, you didn't play surrounded, and we all knew what we were playing for, then having a draw as half a win is slightly, yeah, that feels not quite right. You want
mm.
to go 3-1-0 or 5-2-1 or whatever it
Yeah,
is,
make the win like worth fighting
more
for
than
kind of
more
thing
than
over
what,
the
yeah.
draw.
And potentially you might say, well, you want to have secondaries as well. But in the context of what it was, which was, fun competitive play without being, foot to the floor, etc., it didn't bother me. So
Nice. Um, well, who won overall?
overall top 5. So I'll do it in reverse order.
Oh,
So fifth,
exciting. Drum
yeah,
roll, please.
drum roll, please. And the reason I'm doing it into reverse order is each of the top 5 were individual unique nations, which I thought was really cool.
Oh, that is
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so 5th place was Michael Carrick. He was playing Soviets. So Mike had a great weekend, and he'd been playing really well recently. He did really well at the Welsh Nationals. Has been playing a lot of games in between and before the Welsh Nationals, and really, really, wanting to push on as a player. He did fantastically well. 4th place was Adam with a German list, and the list is really interesting because if you look at it, that is not the best, most competitive German list you can possibly take. There's half tracks in there, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, a cool list. 3rd place was Paul Wickens with his Brits. Great list, like I said earlier. Second place was Ben Andrews with Japanese. Ben again has been really working on his game in the last few months. He's been playing a lot of players in and around the South Coast, a lot of England players and so on. And Ben's Japanese list, it's not the bamboo spam, bamboo horde. It's a combination of there's Manchukuo, dismounted Manchukuo, so tough fighters in there. There's veterans in there. He's got the Type 92 tankette, which I said already is really like that. There's engineers, there's HE, etc. So a nice Japanese list that isn't your bamboo spam horde. And then first place, drum roll, for the second year in a row, the only person I believe to have won back-to-back Warlord GTs was Gary Morgan. With his US list, with his US Marines, and it's a great US Marines list. If you had to say to somebody, write the best US Marines list you can, you put what is it, four squads of US Marines. You put an engineer squad in. You take the engineer squad that goes into the flamethrower slot. You take some transport. You take a multi launcher. You take a Dakar Stewart. You take a Recce Jeep, MG Recce Jeep. Yeah, it's a brilliant list, and Gary plays that a lot. When
That's what I was going to say. Even more importantly than how good the list is, the fact that he's been playing probably a slight variation on this list, but in essence the same list for easy 3 years now, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show that once you know exactly the strengths and weaknesses of your list, you really can make it work for you.
Yeah, Gary, if it's a generic reinforced platoon event and it's full on competitive, we know that Gary brings his US. If it's a thematic theatre list, he brings his DAC with his Schutzen. Those of you who have played in the UK for the last couple of years, we know what Gary's going to bring. But great list. So what was really nice was that Ben and Gary were playing in round 6, and they both had 5 wins going into that game. Obviously, whoever won that was absolutely guaranteed to finish first. If it was a draw, then it was going to come down to kill dice. It was a draw. But Gary pipped it overall with kill dice over the 6 games. But yeah, that's what you want to see. The final round, first and second place, going into the final round, playing off, knowing that whoever wins that is going to walk away and be the GT winner. As it was a draw. And talking to both of them afterwards, it was a massively hard fought game for both of them. Could have gone either way. So
yeah, and that's quite nice. That's one of the big benefits of Swiss, that by the end you are playing someone who's sort of tiered appropriately, and it really is an important match rather than the swings of random draws. And it does, looking at the strength of schedule, the higher placed players did play generally more difficult opponents,
yes,
especially on the second day. But there is definitely a trend there. It's probably slightly more spread than it usually would be, but the trend is there, and so it is interesting that actually, like, I don't have as big a problem with semi-Swiss as I thought I would before we'd sort of seen it used at a big tournament. Because generally with normal Swiss on day one, you bounce up and down anyway, because you might lose your first game, go all the way at the bottom of the table, then go all the way back to sort of like top 3. And then until game 4, you kind of bounce it anyway. And so actually the random draw, if it's 6 games, I think it does work.
Yeah, when we looked at the strength of schedule afterwards, the guys in the top 10, top 15 deserve to be there. They had difficult games, and they deserve to be there. Several people who didn't go to the weekend asked me afterwards, do you think the whole random draw had an influence overall? And obviously there's an element where if you pick up 3 wins on day 1 against random draw opponents who may not be as experienced or as skillful as you as your player, you may well pick up 3 wins. But by going Swiss on day 2, by the time you get to round 5 and round 6, if you've punched above your weight, for want of a better phrase, you're probably going to get punched a bit down. Equally, if you've had a rough day 1 because you've played players who are more experienced and so on at the game than you, day 2 should then start to level out, because you'll start to find your niche kind of thing. And I think that's it. Being 6 games obviously helps a lot. If it was 5 games and only 3 games on day 1 non-Swiss, you could have had a rough weekend, because you may only have kind of found your sort of level, as it were, on round 5. And if that was the last round, that might leave a bit of a sour taste.
Or vice versa, you could have a really easy day 1
and
then find yourself out your depth day 2. So
yeah,
I was just thinking about that, and I was thinking, if it's 5 games, I think I'd only want 2 random games, or maybe it's
Mhm.
even just the first game random. Well,
Yeah,
which it always is anyway,
which it always
but
is.
just
Yeah,
the first 2 random
yeah, yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
yeah, I think if you go more than half random, then it does allow chance to play a bigger input
Yeah.
than it should really.
And I think, going back to a point I made earlier, that I was looking forward to playing new people. If this was a full-on Swiss, situation from round one, chances are by rounds 3, 4, and 5, I may well have played people that I have played at the Nationals or Beachhead or Warfare or what have you. Whereas I got the opportunity through the random pairing to play people that I may not normally have played. Um, which was great, and that's what I wanted was 6 fun games, get a chance to see the GT and BritCon, and ideally play people I don't normally play.
And I
If I
think the big
play,
help with that is just the quantity of players. And also we had people
yeah,
traveling a long way to get there, didn't we?
yeah, we had people from all over the world. So there were three guys came over from Thailand, which was amazing, and they all got games on Friday night. So I know
Nice.
Paul Wickens played one of them, and I think can't remember who else played, but all three of them had games on Friday night. They collectively won the most sporting prize, which I thought was brilliant, for coming all this way. There were guys over from Germany, Manuel, Thomas, and Sebastian that were over from Germany. There were other players from Europe who I didn't get to meet, but I know they come over. And there were players from all over the UK, and there were players that we don't see at UK tournament events like Beachhead Warfare and the Nationals and so on, and Welsh Open, which I go to. So that was brilliant. It was a real mixture of people from in and around the UK, Europe, but then fair play to the guys from Thailand for coming over as well. So
Yeah. I think with it being sort of branded as the premier
yeah.
tournament, if you are going to do one a year, I can totally understand why you would choose that one because you would
Yes.
expect it to be sort of the highest caliber, wouldn't you?
Or I didn't talk to the guys from Thailand, but or you've come over because it is the Warlord GT, it's Warlord's biggest event, and you want to experience that without it necessarily being because you want to come over for a fully competitive event. The three
No,
guys
that's what
who
I mean by the highest calibers in like the highest caliber events, the
got
the
it. Yeah,
best
yeah, yeah.
tables, the best
Yes.
run, all that stuff. You
Yeah, yeah,
know
yeah.
what you know you're going to get a good weekend compared
Yeah.
to if you go to a like I don't know, Welsh Nationals is always good, but if you didn't know that,
Yes.
you don't really know, do you?
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And the tables are great. Gaz, between Gaz and Colin, they've got more than 50 tables they can rock up to a tournament with, and like I said, they're nice tables. It's good quality terrain. So, and that in itself is a massive achievement to be able to put on. What do we have? 35 tables this weekend. 36 tables as one spare, but with the capacity to do more is brilliant.
Nice. Anything else to report?
No, I just interested to see what happens next. Talking to Marcus over the weekend and talking to Gaz as well. This definitely seems to be a feeling amongst the Warlord staff and the TA team with Gaz that V3 is getting a lot of attention, and the Warlord are expecting the player base to increase and increase, and they're really hoping that next year it's an even bigger event, and that would be brilliant. I would love to see a huge event. It's in summertime in England. You can never guarantee the weather in England, but if you're going to guarantee it, August is probably one of the better months to come over. Nottingham's nice and central. It works for the UK. It works for airports internationally as well. So yeah, I would love to see a really big event next year at BritCon. Is that the Warlord GT? Is that the Warlord Open? Who knows? That's down to Marcus and the TA team to decide on the name. But yeah, I really enjoyed it and thoroughly recommend it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think historically it's had even more players. I think there's been a couple of years where it's gone even bigger. And so with sort of the flood of new blood from V3, hopefully we will see it as a even bigger tournament next year. But either way, I imagine it'll be at least as good, if not better.
Yeah. So that's it for this episode. That's it really for V2 for us. We are going to go to the Welsh Open, so I'm sure that we'll report back in September. But in terms of V2, that's it from us in terms of Tommy's. We've been working behind the scenes, getting ready for V3, and we're looking forward to talking about that as and when we can in September. But in terms of V2, thank you very much. It's ta-ta for now from me.
And ta-ta for now from him. Ta-ta.